Hi, welcome to this morning's session. We're going to be talking with my co-founder, David Hansen, about something that we're super excited about, DAC7, something that we've been looking at a lot. So it's really exciting to be able to sit here with David today and to be able to sort of dig a little bit deeper into what DAC7 directive actually is. And just as a quick recap of what Gigapay is, so we're a payment infrastructure built specifically for businesses who are paying a high volume of creators and influencers within the creator economy. So welcome, David.
Thank you very much.
So let's kick it off. So this new EU directive that's coming out, I think like a lot of people haven't quite grasped yet what exactly the requirements are and how harsh it's going to be for platforms. So can you just tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, of course. So a brief recap of what DAC7 is that it's a EU directive on sharing information about taxable income that comes through platforms. And one of the issues that EU has had is that often when you have cross-border transactions, it's difficult for the platforms or for the authorities to see how much income is actually generated through these, especially since the transactions go cross-border. And as a follow-up on this, EU wants to have a better, the authorities in EU wants to have a better insight into this. So they have enforced DAC7, which will improve the visibility for tax authorities.
That's great. I mean, I think it's better for society as a whole, at least from our perspective. But I mean, I know a lot of people are a little bit, they could see these requirements as harsh. What sort of platforms fall under DAC7 and which don't?
Yes, so platform is, to start with, a quite wide description or wide definition. But the platforms that really are affected are those that act as some sort of intermediary or agent or marketplace between, on the one hand, the buyer and on the other hand, the seller. And these are platforms like maybe Airbnb, where you have someone is renting in accommodation, or it could also be something like eBay, where you also have someone that is selling a good, and where the platform kind of acts as this intermediary that brokers the deal between the buyer and the seller. It's also important that the platform in some way or another is taking care of the payments or have an insight into what is being transacted. Otherwise, they obviously can't really share any information about how much has been transacted between the buyer and the seller. So those are the main requirements. And it's also for certain types of platforms that are in which the person is selling a good, a type of service that is personalized to the buyer, accommodation or rental of accommodation, or rental of transportation means.
Okay, good. I mean, I think it's pretty clear and straightforward when you put it like that. So can you share a little bit more concretely what will be reported to the local tax authorities?
Yes, of course. So what will be reported is primarily personal details or personal or company details about the seller. So the buyer is not really interested in the concept of DAC7, but the details of the seller, so that the tax authorities can identify this person when they receive it. And secondly, also, so that could be, for instance, a tax identification number. It can be a VAT number. It can be name and address and so forth. The requirement depends a little bit on if the seller is an individual or if it's a company. And in addition to this, there is also a requirement to send the financial information about the transaction that has been going on through the platform.
This sounds like quite a lot of work. Do you think, I mean, I feel like I know the answer to this question after just what you said, but do you think it will be easy or complicated for platforms to be able to comply with DAC7?
It depends on what platform you ask, I guess. But naturally, the platforms that are only targeting one market will have a much easier time to adjust to this, because they're usually used to what information and where you can gather it in the local market. But for those platforms that are acting across borders, it's a lot more difficult. We have 27 different countries in the EU, and all of them have different tax identification numbers, and they are issued at different times depending on how you act. So it's difficult. And in addition to this, the tax identification number and the VAT number needs to be verified if possible. So it's a big mapping project to just get hold of this information and to understand when and what you should do.
Yeah, it sounds pretty complex for a SME to be able to handle those sorts of requirements.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I guess the big question for a lot of people maybe listening to this webinar is, why is a company like Gigapay, which is obviously not a platform in the definition that you gave it, why have we put so much effort into really understanding this new directive?
No, it's true that we're not affected. Typically, payments companies or companies that are acting as employer on record and so forth are not really affected by DAC7. The reason why we do this is that we are interested in this space in general, and I think that a lot of the things that we already do today is collecting this type of information, and we already have access to it, and we have knowledge on how to do it, which platforms don't always do. And therefore we also see this as a potential for us to build trust in the community in general, in the creator space, to actually help our platforms that we are interacting with on a daily basis to remain compliant. And we see this as a competitive advantage to build trust in the industry as a whole.
Yeah, that's great. So from an end user perspective, for the platform's customers, how will they experience the change with this new DAC7 regulation on the platform side?
I said just a few minutes ago, I think that the sellers the buyers of the service won't really notice anything. So there it will be as frictionless as before. On the seller side, there will be more requirements that will be put on the platforms, and this means that the sellers will have to be willing to share some additional personal information or company details that they may not have done before. And in certain jurisdictions, I think that this will be seen as a problem. In places like France and Germany, you might not be as willing to give away this type of information, and a lot of it is information that is highly sensitive in those markets. Whereas maybe in Sweden, where you are a little bit more adjusted to giving away, for instance, your TIN number, you will see less of a friction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And do you think there's any sort of ways on how platforms can really reduce these sort of friction points for the user?
There are, and the main objective is to be early with mapping out what is required and when it's required. The second thing is trying to automate the things that can be automated. And I think that there are a lot of things that can be automated. It might be a little bit difficult to do if you want to do it across a lot of markets at the same time. But there are things that can definitely reduce the verification and validation part of information that you collect. And that will, the more automated platform and the less friction you have in your platform, the more likely it will be that people want to use it and actually get activated in using the platform.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that the directive is set to sort of come into play into the beginning of 23, which is less than a month away now. And I know also from talking to a lot of businesses that will be impacted by this, they haven't really set the processes in place yet. Is there any way or possibility for them to postpone implementing DAC7?
Not really to postpone it. You need to be handling your due diligence processes from the start of 2023. Of course, there are requirements where you can maybe not postpone it, but you can gather information at a later stage, but that puts your platform business at the risk as well, because if you're not collecting the correct information and relaying it to the tax authorities, you will end up being the one who is in trouble by the end of the year when you're sitting with a lot of details that are unverified or that you haven't collected and need to try to get your seller to be willing to do this.
Yeah.
It's usually easier to do it already at the registration part rather than at a much later stage when the payment already has been made and there is no real incentive for the individual or company to share the details.
Yeah, absolutely. And you spoke a little bit about the trouble that the platform can get into. More concretely, what's the sort of like are there any sanctions or what could happen if you don't sort of implement it?
Yes, and the primary sanction is paying different forms of sanctions fees. This can be very different in different countries. If we take Sweden as an example, you can pay up to 1,200 euros in fees per seller that you don't declare for.
Why?
And that's if you're also doing repeatedly failed to do this for some period of time. In other countries, you will see other levels of and other types of sanctions, and it's up to the individual state to set the actual sanction for this.
Wow. I mean, 1,200 euros, and that's a lot, especially when you think about platform businesses and sometimes the value that you can get from transaction, it would even hit 1,200 euros.
No, not in a year.
Yeah, so that's pretty scary numbers if you start thinking about it. From your perspective, do you see like what sort of solutions do you see being on the market right now when it comes to DAC7? I mean, I know we're looking at it as well. And how expensive could it be really for a platform to sort of get up and running and to become DAC7 compliant if they wanted to handle it?
Yeah. I think that the market for an actual DAC7 compliant service, a fully DAC7 compliant service that helps you with everything, I have not seen one of those yet. There are definitely companies that take care of parts of this flow, but maybe more on the validation of a certain data point side. But that would also mean that there are some other processes that are left for you to handle yourself. The cost of this is also a little bit difficult to estimate because of that. But if you look at the impact analysis that EU did, they say that it would cost about 25 to 60 euros to just verify an user to start with, and then the Swedish authorities have in their impact assessment imply that the cost will be about 120 crowns to do this. But that's also, it's not only verifying it once, because after a few years you need to also revisit these users and to re-verify them. And the cost for that is usually a little bit lower, but it's still in the range of 3 to 9 euros according to the impact analysis.
Well, I mean, that's going to make a massive impact on a lot of these businesses' bottom lines if they don't sort of find a way on how to really address it in an effective way.
Yes, and that's also one of the things with this, that sometimes you see suggestions that this should be handled manually, and having an FT sitting and verifying this information is it's very far from the tech society that we have envisioned before. But of course there will be solutions that will eventually help out on doing these tasks in a more automated way, and that's also what we're looking into.
Exactly. I mean, and it makes a lot of sense, especially since we're looking at the digital economy. Why would you start implementing manual processes?
Yes.
But maybe you need to do a bit of that in the beginning. So do you think there's any, right now from what we've been discussing, there's a lot of scary things can happen if you don't sort of implement DAC7 correctly. But do you think there's any sort of positive benefits of DAC7?
Yes, you mentioned it earlier, and that's the societal value of this, definitely. And this will enable tax authorities to do what they actually should do, and that's taking the correct tax out of earnings. This will definitely increase the transparency and reduce the risk of people avoiding to pay taxes. So it will definitely benefit society. But from a platform side, I also see this as a proof that platforms have matured and that the market as a whole has become a lot more mature. And of course, that brings with it like a trustworthiness label, and that if you handle this correctly, you can also become a more integrated part of the economy as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like it's like directive like these is more like a coming of age for the digital economy, and also, I mean, there's the one part from my perspective where it makes it's better for society, of course, to be able to capture more tax income, but also making it more frictionless for the platforms to be able to do the reporting and to find out how to do it. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. So what happens if the platforms don't report in accordance with Tax7 reporting in the beginning of 23?
Yeah. So at the beginning of 2023, there will be no issues because it's really reported in 2024. However, there will be sanctions if you don't report in time, and typically in most of the cases where I've seen it, anyways, there have been cases where you report. Or if you don't report in time, you will have first a delay fee, and then there might be other fees adding on to this at a later stage if you still avoid to actually report this. But it's really the same as with the sanctions, that it's up to the individual state to govern what they need to set, and those measures have to be proportionate to the, well, not offense, but to the incompliance with the law.
Yeah, and I think that if we just sort of take a step back from the directive and we look at like the impact on sort of what's happening in the economy today, that we see like rising interest rates, and then a lot of companies now are really being pressed to focus on profitability. Do you think that this has really impacted the interest for an investment in DAC7 compliance?
That's a difficult question. Of course, it impacts when you want to take care of things, but I think the bigger problem with DAC7 in general is that companies or platforms in general has been very slow with realizing what this is and how it will impact their business, rather than being a proper economic decision. I think another issue is that the different legislators around the EU have been very slow with implementing this as well. In the case of Sweden, again, we got the law at 30th of November, and it's due to be implemented before January the 1st. And this also caused friction, because that means that the tax authorities then can't give proper answers to how you should handle things, meaning until they actually have a law in place. So they are delayed in their descriptions, and you see this around in the EU as well, that you're getting closer to the deadline, but there is no real answers on how to actually solve these issues and how it should be handled in practice.
Do you think that the platforms or the EU could have done more or could do more to reach these platforms so they're actually informed on what DAC7 is?
I don't think it's the role necessarily of EU to communicate this. It's really up to the legislators in the local country to have this in place in a much earlier stage, and it's then as a consequence of this, it's also up to the tax authorities to share the information within the country. But of course, it's a difficult matter. It's also difficult to give a pre-decision on whether your company will be affected by this. It would be a huge undertaking for any tax authority to go through every company in their own country to try to map out which one is responsible and which isn't.
Well, that's true. I think at the same time, like I know that we developed a really great tool earlier this year, and something that we've been talking about when we speak to customers or potential customers. Sometimes they don't even realize they're going to be impacted by DAC7, and then when you can't sort of like turn to local authorities and say, hey, do I need to be DAC7 compliant? And then they're like, you need to wait. I mean, what sort of pressure does that push onto a business at the end of 2022?
Yes, it puts a lot of pressure, I mean, it's similar to what we said before. It's cost-wise, it's quite a big project. So if you go back to the numbers that EU expects this to cost for an average platform, they expect it to cost about 400,000 euros just to implement the directive into their processes. And on top of this, it would be like a maintenance fee or like a maintenance cost of maybe 50,000 euros annually. And of course, it's a big undertaking, and you don't want to do that wrong. If you start a project, you want to be certain of what you need to do so that you don't build yourself into issues and have to revisit this at a later stage.
Yeah, I think like just those numbers, I think that larger organizations can definitely absorb those sorts of costs and put those processes into place. But for SMEs or startups or business sort of just getting going, these sorts of directives could also be perceived as being inhibitive as well.
Yes, it can definitely create a barrier to entry for a digital platform to start actually their working, and there are no bottom or like minimum requirements for when you have to start doing this. Especially not on the service side or accommodation side of the directive. So you really need to start with this from day one. And of course, I mean, in a smaller platform, you don't have as many sellers that you need to validate.
Sure.
But having manual processes is also not good because it creates friction. So it's more reasonable maybe for someone to go for a big platform where you have less frictions to get up and running to start with.
Exactly.
So it hits disproportionately as well between the platforms.
So I guess like the question that a lot of people could be saying now, or business owners could be saying now, is after listening to all of this, is okay, I don't have 400,000 euros to get up and running. I can't afford an FTE just to be focusing on this. I can't afford to be doing these checks every time. This is going to break my business. Like, what can they really do?
I think that the best way to start is to initially focus on one market if they can, and that's the way that you can at least reduce the friction or the research that you need to do up front to be able to be compliant. The second part would be if you can't do that, then you really need to find a provider that can help you with a more cost-efficient way of solving DAC7. And those are really the two options that you have to confront.
Yeah, and I guess the good thing though for a lot of businesses or platforms, if they're working with service providers within the creator and influencer economy, then we've built a solution that can handle that, which is great. So then they don't have to worry about all the upfront and ongoing costs in the same way. But I guess the part that leaves a lot of question marks could be for platforms that are working more outside the services, or the sort of the focus that we have on how to really handle it.
Yeah, definitely, and that's also something that platforms bring up. That they are a little bit perplexed as to why this requirement is on them and not payment services instead. as far as I've seen, there are not a lot of payment services that have been showing a lot of interest into DAC7. So for the platforms that have integrated with other systems, that is say PayPal, they can't necessarily be sure that this will be handled by PayPal in the end, or that they can get the data from them in a convenient manner. So it's really important that you start this mapping out schedule and how to solve things in the event that it doesn't go right for your platform.
Yeah. And so I guess that so we're sitting 1 or 2 weeks just before Christmas, end of 2022. I'm sitting here, I'm the business owner, and I've just realized that DAC7 is going to impact me. I guess there's a few concrete things that you can do. Start looking at where the transactions are taking place primarily within your platform.
Yeah, definitely. I think the good part is that you don't have to validate your old users the first year, but you can wait a little bit with that. But for new registrations, you need to figure out a solution that can at least run short term on how to collect this and not put your company into too much risk. The due diligence doesn't have to be done up front, but you don't want to push that line before you actually take care of this too far, because then you will end up with a big backlog of manual work that you might have to do or that you have to solve in another way.
Yeah.
And it's not certain that you will actually get access to that data that you need.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great. Thank you so much, David, for this, for sharing with us all the knowledge that you've gained over the last year, I guess. I think super interesting. If anyone wants to learn more about DAC7, then please visit us at gigapay.com. Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.